Greetings to all. It is my distinct pleasure to warmly welcome all of you as we begin today's session on the theme of United States and its present military situation in the Middle East and Africa. I'm Kamakshi Wason, Global Chief Operating Officer at Tillotoma Foundation. Tillotoma Foundation is a global think tank working in the areas of international relations, diplomacy, area studies, gender, climate, strategic, and defense policy. Defense studies has been an important focus area of the foundation. Over the years, we have hosted leading military and strategic experts from across the world. At the outset, I would like to express my gratitude to Mr. Soham Das, Chairperson Director at the Tillotoma Foundation, for his relentless support and vital role in curating this session. At the Tillotoma Foundation, we prioritize diversity, gender equality, sustainability, and being impartial in all our endeavors. We strive to create a platform where thinkers from various backgrounds can come together and engage in meaningful discussions with the aim of finding innovative solutions to global challenges. We believe that in order to address the complex challenges of today's world, it is essential to have an inclusive approach and bring together diverse voices and perspectives. It is with great pleasure that I welcome our esteemed guest today, Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Jahara Matisek. He is a command pilot with over 3,700 hours of flight time in the C-17, E-11 Bacon, T-6, and T-53, including over 1,300 combat hours in Iraq and Afghanistan. He is currently teaching in the Department of National Security Affairs as a military professor at the U.S. Naval War College. In 2022, he was a Bronze Star recipient for serving as Director of Operations and Commander of the 451st Expeditionary Operations Support Squadron, Kandahar Airfield, Afghanistan. Lieutenant Colonel Matisek is a team member of the Irregular Warfare Initiative at the Modern War Institute. His book, Old and New Battle Spaces, Military Power, Society and War, released in January 2022, discusses the growing prominence of the socio-political information warfare. Thank you, Dr. Frankie, for being here at the Tillotoma Foundation. It's so great to see you. The United States has been a key player in the Middle East and Africa for so many years, and it is crucial to understand the current military situation in these regions. The military situation in the Middle East and Africa is of its critical importance due to the United States' long-standing involvement and influence in these regions. The presence and actions of the US military in these regions have significant implications for regional stability, global security, and interest of the US and its allies. In today's discussion, we will delve into the various facets of the US and its military operations in the Middle East and Africa. We will try to analyze the historical context, the impact of US military presence, and the challenges and opportunities facing the region. I'm sure that our speaker will provide valuable insights into the evolving security landscape and the role of the US in the Middle East and Africa. Thank you once again, Lieutenant Colonel Jahara Matisek, for joining us today at this session. Without further ado, I invite Lieutenant Colonel Matisek to start with this presentation. Over to you, Dr. Matisek.
Thank you, Kamakshi, for that nice introduction. So I want to basically, first, I have to do the usual disclaimer. The views I say do not reflect the official positions and views of the U.S. government, Department of Defense, Air Force, etc. So I have to get that out of the way. Other than that, I am excited to answer any kind of questions. Nothing is off the book. I have a lot of academic freedom in my current role teaching here at the Naval War College. So by all means, I'm excited to get any kind of good questions like from your audience right now. So I want to start with, I want to keep this down to three themes because I find that's a really effective way to sort of, frame your mind about where the U.S. is right now and where it's going. So the first thing I want to get to is that the U.S., when it comes especially like to the Middle East and Africa, is just going to be doing a lot less counterinsurgency and counterterrorism. That's just a simple fact. Like, we're just never going to get in the business again of doing that much counterinsurgency and counterterrorism. And so because of that, our focus is obviously we're still using drones, but we're no longer at the same ops tempo that we were 5, 10 years ago. That's just not going to ever happen again. And we have basically either maintained or decreased our security assistance approach to the way we deal with instability, either from insurgents and terrorists and other sort of violent non-state actors across the Middle East and Africa. So considering that theme, that is going to have an impact in the medium to long term, because many of these countries, we from a U.S. perspective, we have essentially subsidized security and stability in these regions. And so because of that, I would anticipate you're going to be seeing more volatility and instability as the U.S. disengages from Africa and the Middle East increasingly over the next couple of years, because we're still trying to do the pivot to China. So because of that, and this is really point two, U.S. strategic competition, which was first coined as great power competition by Trump a few years ago, is going to continue. There has not actually been much of a change in the Biden admin when it comes to being really focused on great power competition, or as again we just changed the term to strategic competition. Is we are trying to make that Indo-Pacific Asia pivot. That's why a year ago or so the Biden admin came out with the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. You guys can go check it out online, and it basically uses sort of the like the concept of, if you're in the Indian Ocean or in the Pacific Ocean, we should have respect for international laws, rules, and norms. And of course, China is the biggest violator in the region in terms of building fake islands and violating everyone's economic exclusion zones through illegal, unregulated fishing and other things of that nature. So what does that mean again for Africa and the Middle East? It means the U.S. just is not going to care about the Middle East and Africa as much, because it pulls away resources from our focus on the Indo-Pacific region. Now, granted, the Indian Ocean does touch the Middle East and Africa, but again, I think even the example of the U.S. having to basically park a bunch of naval assets around like the Horn of Africa to deal with the Houthi attacks, like from Yemen, it represents a sort of containment and holding strategy. And the reason why it's important to kind of consider the context of that right now is, if this was the old America, 10 years ago, we wouldn't just be hanging out off the coast doing, I think at this rate, over the last 2 weeks, we've had 230 airstrikes in Yemen. We actually would have sent in U.S. Special Operation Forces to remove the people that continue to disrupt the shipping lanes around that region. And oh, by the way, this is having a major economic impact on Egypt. And Egypt continues to not actually do anything about it, which is actually quite surprising, which again indicates that the world, at least in Africa and the Middle East, still views the U.S. as the primary provider of security. And in this case, the U.S. is reluctant, but the U.S. is doing it. But it's not doing it at what I would say would be a normal way of operating 5, 10 years ago of how we dealt with rebels firing at at commercial ships. And so, does the U.S. still believe in protecting the global commons and lines of communication and having a free and open seaways? Yes, 100%. It's just that we are no longer committed to taking like that same level of risk of actually sending in special operation forces to remove the threat anymore. Now it's just I think I think the Israelis actually call it you're just kind of mowing the grass. You're not actually dealing with the problem, right? Or other people have basically called it like the whack-a-mole strategy. Uh, you you do have to get rid of the threat, but it never actually goes away, in the medium and long term. Uh, the third big theme that I want to end with is that the U.S. Is really struggling with its engagement in the Middle East and Africa as a balancing act because we're trying to again really promote this idea of like a free and open Indo-Pacific, the importance of a liberal, the rules-based order where we have like respect for international laws, international norms, and the promotion of democracy. You'll notice again, like I was saying, there has not been much of a shift between the Biden admin and the in terms of what the Trump admin was trying to do, or at least not do in Africa and the Middle East. And so the U.S. is increasingly being more neutral when it comes to a lot of these countries in the region because the U.S. does not have a proper strategy in the Middle East or Africa. And it's because we'd rather be focused on protecting Taiwan and again, doing the Asia pivot, which, if you guys don't remember, the U.S. has been trying to do the Asia pivot since Obama talked about it in 2011. So here we are 13 years later, still struggling to fully do the China pivot because it seems like every few years the U.S. gets dragged back into Europe or Africa, the Middle East. So obviously, when you think about what happened after 2011, 2011 was a great year for the U.S. to actually make that pivot happen because the U.S. was pulling all combat forces out of Iraq, right? And the U.S. was actually starting to pull forces out of Germany to, again, make the pivot towards Asia. And then, of course, by 2014, you have the rise of ISIS, and then you have Russia conquering, parts of eastern Ukraine and annexing Crimea. So now it's like, oh crap! Now we have to again put assets and resources back into the European theater, back into the Middle East to deal with these two threats. And then obviously when Trump comes to office by 2018 and 2019, it's pretty clear he doesn't want America in the business of doing counterinsurgency, counterterrorism in Iraq or Afghanistan because he wants to do the Asia pivot and actually counter China much more forcefully and much more directly. And, his admin obviously wavered on the idea of providing lethal aid to Ukraine before 2022. Eventually, he did, allow them to get javelins, which, in my opinion, Javelin anti-tank missiles are very much a defensive weapon. You don't exactly, go on the offense with an anti-tank missile that only has a range of, I think 3 to 5 kilometers or at much. So taking in that context, the problem is because the U.S. had always sort of, again, maintained a robust presence across Africa and the Middle East, the second and third order effects of the U.S. disengaging, not just militarily, but even from like a State Department perspective, many of our embassies in the Middle East and Africa are just not properly staffed or manned and lack even ambassadors, which again reflects how little we actually care about getting that part of the world correct right now. And the second, third order effects of this now is you're continuing to see, just thousands and thousands of migrants and refugees all flowing up to Europe, which is disrupting European politics, which is why you are seeing the rise of more sort of the right-wing nationalist political parties across Europe, because they're having to deal with the flows of immigrants that they used to never ever have to deal with. And of course, why are all these immigrants flowing there and all these refugees? Well, it's partly because of the Arab Spring in 2011. A lot of the countries that used to have, very authoritarian countries, would not let their people ever leave. And so now that you've ended up with a lot of these sort of failed states like Libya and Syria, it's really opened up the spigots of people having to flee these countries, and they're all basically going towards the European Union. And of course, the other side of the coin that we don't like to talk about, and I don't know if India wants to talk about it either, is the issue of climate change. Also is causing major issues across the Middle East and Africa. So, for example, I was just in Iraq this past June and talked with a lot of Iraqi generals and other leaders. And in one sense, they had a lot of hope that Iraq was finally going to be a stable country because they have managed to get the ISIS threat under control, and they're figuring out how to integrate all of the Shia militias into the Iraqi army structure. And yet at the same time, this Iraqi general was saying, "I'm really concerned that our country is literally going to run out of water." So he was giving an example how they had to relocate about 10,000 people from the area of Fallujah because the wells are going dry. And in their estimates right now, they anticipate a major river, that goes through Baghdad and most of Iraq is going to be completely dry in the next 15 years. So if Iraq does not have a solution to that, that's going to be a major humanitarian crisis. And then, if we shift our attention to places like Somalia and the rest of the Sahel across Africa, you're going to see continued and increasing violence by not only violent non-state actors, but also by the militaries of these countries, because they have received so much security assistance over the years that they are somewhat capable, but at the same time, they're also ineffective because their governments are also very ineffective as well. And that is going to be a continued major growing crisis, whether it's South Sudan, Niger, Chad. If you guys didn't hear, just had a major coup attempt in the capital. You're gonna basically see a lot of unraveling, like across like Africa, like especially as the U.S. is disengaging there. Like a good example of that is because of the coup in Niger. The U.S. has two drone bases in Niger. It sounds like they're probably going to shut one down, and they have on the table to shut down the other one, even though these bases are relatively brand new and actually cost like billions of dollars to to build and upkeep and maintain. And it sounds like the U.S. is looking to abandon this if the security situation and the political situation continues to get worse in the region. And so it is not looking good for the future of that part of Africa. And the French are essentially leaving. And in fact, about the only place where the French and the Americans are actually welcome is Chad right now. The U.S. and the French actually share a joint base there in terms of training and assisting Chadian forces. But the fact there was just a coup attempt, indicates that may be a red flag that there is unhappiness with the current leader of Chad, who happens to be the son of the recently deceased leader of Chad, Idris Deby, and the current leader is the son and also a West Point grad. I think he graduated from West Point back in 2006, 2007. So in one sense, the U.S. does have some informal influence because of the current president of Chad is a West Point grad. But again, things like that are usually waning in many ways. Much like the president of Egypt is a U.S. Army War College graduate as well. So those are my three big points and themes I basically wanted to hammer on. And so I would love to hear what you guys think, your feelings about this. My apologies for being somewhat negative about this, but the more I've gone down the rabbit hole the last few years about the future of Africa and the Middle East, it's not looking good. I'll put it that way. So
thank you so much, Dr. Matisek. It actually was very short, simple, and You were very just on point. So thank you so much for an excellent speech on today's theme, United States and its present military situation in the Middle East and Africa. It was very informative and also thought-provoking. You have shed light on the complex dynamics and challenges faced by the US in these regions.